I invite you this morning to open with me in your Bibles to Genesis chapter 27. We have a lengthier passage to look at today. We'll seek to do so in a timely manner. And the most important thing we'll seek to do is learn what God has for us in this passage today. As we continue through these next few chapters in our Gospel Providence study, it becomes pretty clear pretty quickly that of the big three, the ones we often refer to as the patriarchs, Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, that Isaac is the one that receives the least biographical attention. Interestingly enough, though he is mentioned multiple times, we actually, at the end of chapter 25, got a little bit more insight into Jacob before chapter 26, which is really the only spot until today's passage that we get really an insight into Isaac and his character. Now, his role in the unfolding of God's redemptive plan certainly is significant. We've seen that. His name has popped up since even our last series in chapters 12 to 24. He is, after all, the child of promise. But as we reach this 27th chapter, that character development of Isaac is going to come to a conclusion already. Why there is such a little focus upon this one patriarch who never ever left the land of promise, unlike his father Abraham or his son Jacob, is a little bit of a mystery, though I imagine by the time we get to the end of our chapter today, we will recognize and understand some of the reasons why he quickly fades off the scene. But what I'd like to do this morning, before getting into our actual text, is read the final two verses from the previous chapter, chapter 26, verses 34 and 35. When Esau was 40 years old, he took Judith, the daughter of Beri the Hittite, to be his wife, and Basemath, the daughter of Elon the Hittite, and they made life bitter for Isaac and for Rebekah. Now, having already learned of Esau, the firstborn of Isaac's twin son, back in chapter 25, signing over his birthright to Jacob, these couple of verses might feel a little throwaway, just like some extra information to help us, but ultimately, as the story unfolds, seeming to possibly carry little significance in the storyline of Genesis. But I think once we get into the meat of our passage for today, we'll see that that's not the case. At the end of Genesis 25, the narrator had pronounced this indictment upon Esau after he had sold his birthright. He had said this: Esau despised, or he repudiated, his birthright, his position really as the firstborn. He did not treat it with esteem. And so as these two verses at the close of chapter 26 demonstrate then a continued general disdain that Esau seems to have for his family and really just for the things and the active fulfillment of the promises of God. Esau has his own agenda. He's got his own thing cooking. But as our text unfolds today, we're going to find out that he's not the only one. And whereas that very short account back in Genesis 25, if you remember it a few weeks ago, we talked about kind of a mundane account, a day in the life of Jacob and Esau, it would seem to be, other than this birthright and the importance of that element. But today in this text, we're going to return to a more epic account like we're typically used to seeing in the book of Genesis. We called that last sermon People and Providence. Today, though, while people are certainly continuing to do things, things don't feel as mundane. And we are brought even more than we were in Genesis 25, I think, face to face with the fact that wherever people in Providence are interacting, ultimately what's going on is God and Providence. And of course, this becomes a problem for us, right? Because we, people in general, when we talk about God and His plans, often we confuse our own plans with God's plans. But what we're going to learn in this text is that God has plans, and what He has planned will surely happen. Now, the human element often is going to make it anything but a straight line to get to the end of God's plan. It's going to go all over the place. We're going to see that in this chapter today. One can imagine the original audience, probably, as we've indicated before, those kind of at the end of Deuteronomy, getting ready to enter into the promised land. The children of these patriarchs here. You can imagine them hearing this account for the first time and thinking, how did we ever even make it to this point? How did we end up with all these people and getting ready to re-enter the land of promise? It doesn't look likely. None of the characters in this chapter come out looking good. Sometimes you end up with scriptural accounts, and this person's the bad guy, this person's the good guy. Everybody in this text is bad today, other than God. And yet God will certainly accomplish his purposes. And that is a part of the glory and the mystery of the providence. The people do their thing. They often think and act as if they are autonomous, and yet they are actually playing out the plans of God. And so this morning, I believe each of us are reminded of our need to relinquish, to hold loosely our claims upon God's plans. They are his plans. They are not ours. Which brings us to our text today. The first scene in our story begins with a private exchange. In fact, all of the scenes in the story only ever have two people interacting in them. Just different people continue to leave the stage and enter the stage. This one's going to be between Isaac and his oldest son Esau as they make an initial move in the battle over the plan of God. But what they fail to consider in all their scheming is this: God's plan is determined. It's already been determined in the past. It will surely happen, and you cannot change it. Will you join me in the text as we read verses 1 through 4? When Isaac was old and his eyes were dim so that he could not see, he called Isaac, his older son, and he said to him, "My son." And he answered, "Here I am." He said, "Behold, I am old, and I do not know the day of my death. Now then, take your weapons, your quiver and your bow, and go out to the field and hunt game for me and prepare me delicious food." You might remember Isaac was really into Esau's food back in chapter 25. "Prepare me delicious food such as I love, and bring it to me so that I may eat, that my soul may bless you before I die." The events narrated here are pretty typical of the time, actually. Isaac's age and failing eyesight lead him to believe that possibly his days are short. Earlier on, we learned that his older brother Ishmael has already passed off the scene. So it'd be very easy at kind of an advanced age for Isaac to think that his time is short. Now, ironically, Isaac actually lives many years after this moment. But because of his blindness and age, he comes to that specific conclusion. And so a lot of what we see here is what we would typically expect. Father reaching the end of the life in this culture is going to invite his children in, and he is going to provide a blessing. A meal being a part of that would be very normal as well. But there are a couple of things that are a little atypical that should put a red flag up for us and should have put a red flag up for him. First of all, Isaac really seems to be favoring his son Esau primarily because of what Esau can do for him getting the meals from the field. This is the second time this has been mentioned. Back in chapter 25, we learned that Esau was clearly the favorite of Isaac because of his hunting prowess, his ability to provide good meals. And here, apparently, Isaac's selfishness in that regard is still determinative. His appetite continues to be in play. So even though the meal is normal, we're given some clues in the text that maybe it's not also innocent. But another thing stands out even more. What would have been typical during this time would have been for the father to gather all of his children. We'll actually see this kind of thing play out near the end of Genesis with Jacob. But for the father to gather all of his children and then to speak and to give blessings and to do all of those things here. So the fact that only Esau is there and Jacob has been excluded indicates that Isaac only intends to bless Esau. He's scheming the situation. Now, some have tried to figure out how culpable Isaac is here. Back in chapter 25, verse 23, we were told that the older will serve the younger. That prophecy was given only to Rebekah directly in the text, and we recognize that. We even asked when the whole birthright thing came up, did either Jacob or Esau know about that? It's difficult to know, but I will say I have a really hard time thinking that Isaac, being a child of the promise himself, at least by this point, is not aware of this promise that has come. What we seem to have here in these opening verses is an example of Isaac trying to will into existence his plans and try to get God to sign off on them. He's going to naturally favor the firstborn. He's going to think that's what should happen. We'll see Joseph later is going to instinctively do the same thing later on in Genesis with his children. So that's natural, but we know that he favors Esau to begin with. And so it just seems that the prophecy just doesn't hold much weight to him. The fact that Esau had sold Jacob his birthright apparently also did not matter. And Esau's carelessness in what the opening two verses that we read in marrying these Hittite wives should have been a clue to Isaac of the certainty of God's promise as it related to elevating Jacob over Esau. Why? Certainly Isaac remembers that very long chapter and narrative that I remember preaching several months ago about how careful his father was to send a servant out to get one from the family and not one of the foreigners, certainly not from the Canaanites or the Hittites or any of that, to get him a wife in that way. Certainly Isaac knows this is important. But apparently Isaac's physical blindness in this text functions even as a living metaphor of his spiritual blindness toward and a lack of concern related to God's plans. And I wonder, before we move on in the narrative this morning, if the same is true for any of us here today. Are you already setting your plans and then trying to get God to approve them, to sign off on them? Teenagers, as you look at life off into the future, are you just simply trying to get God to sign off on your plans? But it's not limited to teenagers, nor is it limited to the big decisions of life. Now, maybe your situation is not an overt act of disobedience, as Isaac seems to be here, but you may be every bit as presumptuous. Every bit seeking to assert your own will in your life, your own agenda. And maybe you can look at it and say, well, my plans, they don't carry as much weight as Isaac. I mean, Isaac is messing with the line of Christ here. That's a big deal, but not so much for me. And yet, my friend, this morning, you may still be missing how God's plan to spread his fame through the gospel of Jesus is intended to play out specifically in your life. Your life is not your own. And so really the only question when we look at the fact that God's plan is determined is this: will you joyfully and actively participate in his plan, not your plan? And so we're reminded of the call of this text, my friend. Relinquish your claims on God's plans. They're his. They're not yours. The next portion of our text is going to involve both scene number 2 and scene number 3 in this account. Two characters will once again take the stage in each. Scene 2 is going to begin with Esau leaving the stage. He's going to go and fulfill his father's wishes and commands to him. Certainly, he must think in his mind, this maybe provides him a loophole from the whole birthright fiasco that had happened a couple chapters earlier. But nope, Mom was listening. There were only 2 on the stage, but Mom was in the back, and she overheard everything that was happening. And now she has decided to insert herself into the drama. You see, that prophecy, the older will serve the younger, was given directly to her. She knows what is right. She knows what is just. She knows exactly what God's plan is. And she knows that what has just happened in that other room is not right. There's a sense of justice that must well up within her. She's got to fix this. But in seeking to do so, that faith that she exuded back all the way in Genesis 24, when she willfully followed this servant to go back and marry a man sight unseen, seems to escape her in this moment. For she failed to recognize the second truth related to God and his plans, and that's this. God's plan is secure. It's secure. You can't solidify it. You cannot make it any more certain than it already is. Let's continue our reading in verse number 5. Now Rebekah was listening when Isaac spoke to his son Esau. So when Esau went to the field to hunt for game and bring it, Rebekah said to her son Jacob, I heard your father speak to your brother Esau. Bring me game and prepare me delicious food, that I may eat it and bless you before the Lord before I die. Now therefore, my son, obey my voice as I have commanded you. Go to the flock, bring me 2 young goats, so that I may prepare from them delicious food for your father, such as he loves. And you shall bring it to your father to eat, so that he may bless you before he dies. Now, Jacob's not quite sure about this plan. Jacob says to Rebekah in verse 11, Behold, my brother Esau is a hairy man, and I am a smooth man. Perhaps my father will feel me, and I shall seem to be mocking him, which would be terrible in that culture. And I will bring a curse upon myself and not a blessing. And his mother said to him, Let your curse be on me, my son. Only obey my voice and go and bring them to me. So he went and took them and brought them to his mother, and his mother prepared delicious food, such as his father loved. Then Rebekah took the best garments of Esau, her older son, which were with her in the house, and put them on Jacob, her younger son. And the skins of the young goats she put on his hands and on the smooth part of the neck, and she put the delicious food and the bread which she had prepared into the hand of her son Jacob. You see, from Rebekah's perspective, this is about to be a disaster. If Isaac gets his way, God's plan is going to be ruined. Something's got to be done. And so just like her husband had done with Esau, she goes to Jacob and begins to just start issuing out orders. Here's what you need to do. She simply could not rest upon God's providence. She simply could not wait on the Lord. His promise needed to be more secure. And so just like her mother-in-law had done all those years ago when she had tried to convince Abraham to take Hagar as the wife, so that way the whole seed promise could be fulfilled, Rebekah takes matters into her own hands. Now, taking intervention measures isn't necessarily a wrong thing here, but I don't know, maybe just go have an actual conversation with somebody. Say, this isn't right. This is what the Lord has commanded, something, and then leave it in the Lord's hands at that point. But for her, the end justifies the means. One can also imagine here in her mind an ancient form of what we call now whataboutism, right? If somebody else does something, whataboutism lets us say, it's okay for me to do this because whatever I'm doing in comparison to them, it's not nearly as bad, so that justifies what I'm doing. And so she justifies her own sin. She's going to disguise both Jacob and she's got to cook the meal in such a way, disguise the meal, so that Isaac will think he is getting what he asked for. Now, obviously, Jacob wasn't completely buying this. We read that in the text. Rebekah basically has to reassure him and say, look, let the curse be upon me. And once again, that's a pretty audacious thing to say. Rebekah doesn't really get to make a call on that. That's not her call to make. So as scene 2 closes, scene 3 sees Jacob enter to be with his father. Would you join me in verse number 18? So he went into his father, and he said, My father. And he said, Here I am. Who are you, my son? Jacob said to his father, I am Esau, your firstborn. I have done as you have told me. Now sit up and eat of my game, that your soul may bless me. Isaac's suspicious. He said to his son, How is it that you found it so quickly, my son? He answered, Oh, because the Lord your God granted me success. Then Isaac said to Jacob, Please come near, that I may feel my son, to know whether you are really my son Esau or not. So Jacob went near to Isaac his father, who felt him and said, The voice is Jacob's voice, but the hands are the hands of Esau. And he did not recognize him, because his hands were hairy like his brother Esau's hands. And so he blessed him. Once again, he said, "Are you really my son Esau?" And can you imagine Jacob at this point? This is not going well. He's very concerned. His bluff is going to get called. "Are you really my son Esau?" And he answered, "I am." And then he said, "Bring it near to me, that I may eat of my son's game and bless you." And so he brought it near to him, and he ate, and he brought him wine, and he drank. Scene 3 is where Jacob, despite his uneasiness, demonstrates complicity in his mother's plan. And on 3 separate occasions, he's just going to bald-faced lie to his father. And then he makes matters worse by, in one of those lies, invoking the name of God in a carelessly blasphemous way, explaining that he found the food because God had blessed him. You can almost imagine that the feel of this is this: God has blessed me, now it's your turn. And the scene is filled with drama as it becomes clear that Jacob, once he spoke, had given himself away in some regard, and his dad is uncertain that he has the right person. And you could just imagine the sweat starting to pour down Jacob as these questions keep coming, and Isaac keeps wanting to feel him and touch him, and he keeps asking these questions. And then there's that ticking clock as well. Esau's out there. He could show up at any moment and the whole game would be done. So Isaac is seeking to do his due diligence. Jacob doubles down on the whole ruse. And the question is this: will his dad be convinced? Before fully answering that question in the text, let's stop once again to ask this question: Do you in your life and in your navigating this world, do you believe that God's plan is secure? Or do you rather seek to help him out or even do his job for him? You know, this can be an enticing temptation for us, especially in a world filled with so much evil. When we are fighting for something that God has revealed, when right and wrong seems to be clear. But the danger comes when we excuse sin because of the sinful actions of others. We ourselves utilize this whataboutism. This happens so often in the conflict we have in our homes, in the relationships sometimes that we have in our church, in our workplaces, really in any of our interactions with people. And I think one context, just through the nature of media and social media and all of this stuff, one context where this is really getting demonstrated most publicly right now for the world to see what the church is all about is the whataboutism filling our dialogue in the political sphere today. It seems these days that if the other side has been bad actors, that justifies about anything, even my own sinful responses or those of the people that I cheer for. But what if instead of being filled with angst, we were to be faithful to the kingdom task before us and let God work in his way? Now, this isn't a letting go and letting God or doing nothing. This is taking appropriate action. I think there's appropriate action Rebecca could have taken in this particular case that did not include deceit and manipulation. How will we know when we believe God's plan is secure? It's when we relinquish, when we let go of our claims on God's plans. Well, scene 3 continues with Jacob and Isaac there. We end up in the next few verses of our text, finding a third reason that we ought to relinquish our claims on God's plans, and that's this: his plan is guaranteed. You cannot mess it up. You can't. Now, how does that work in our humanity? Let's look now at the next few verses 26 to 29. Then his father Isaac said to him, "Come near and kiss me, my son." And I can imagine again the nervousness up for Jacob at this moment. And so he came near and kissed him, maybe shaking and hoping Isaac would notice. But Isaac gets overwhelmed with the thing that's most important to him, the smell of the garments. And he blessed him and he said, "See, the smell of my son is as the smell of a field that the Lord has blessed. May God give you of the dew of heaven and of the fatness of the earth and plenty of grain and wine. Let the people serve you and the nations bow down to you," or show subservience to you. Be Lord over your brothers, and may your mother's sons bow down to you. Cursed be everyone who curses you, and blessed be everyone who blesses you. Isaac, unbeknownst to his own self, is compelled to bless this one that he thinks is Esau. And so he offers this blessing. Now, it's kind of interesting to think about the content of this blessing. In many ways, it sounds very familiar to some of the blessings that have happened previously. Even the covenant given to Abraham back in Genesis 12, the talk about blessing those who bless you and cursing those who curse you. But still, the language here is tinged with references to Esau. You see, right after he smells Jacob and kisses him before the blessing, his first words reference both the smell and the hunting prowess of Esau in the field. That's where the blessing actually starts. But then in God's providence, something that will be immensely important to Jacob, Isaac continues in the blessing to promise agricultural success as well. And so basically, Isaac here in this moment is demonstrating just an absolute disconnect with reality. He thinks he's blessing Esau. He speaks of others as being subservient then to him, in complete opposition to the prophecy made to Rebekah in 25:23 that the older would serve the younger. So what ends up happening is that Isaac gives an unwitting, ignorant blessing to the person he was supposed to bless all along. And here, my friend, is where the grace of God is seen so clearly, is it not? Even in the middle of sin. Would you agree with me? Is God being gracious to Isaac at this moment? I think he is. Isaac is doing the right thing. There is a lot at stake, but that promised line that would ultimately end in Jesus Christ was never truly in danger. Isaac simply could not mess that up if he wanted to. And you might say, well, doesn't that mean that our sin doesn't really matter? It can't really be that big of a deal of God. Oh, it is. We'll see that shortly. Isaac's behavior as the instigator of this whole account is going to later come back to bite him. But it's important to recognize right now that Isaac does not have the ability to torpedo God's plans. And here's the good news for you. Neither do you. All of us blow it. We know we do. And as Stephen led us in a prayer of confession this morning, if we are repentant, our sin grieves us. But God is so gracious to us even in our sin. And I would say even this, especially in our sin. And so as we look back on an event like this from this side of the cross, different from the original actors, different from the original audience, we see how this can justly be the case. How can God be gracious to Isaac? Is because your sin cannot thwart God's plan, generally speaking, big macro picture. Why? Because of his providence. But my friend, your sin also cannot thwart your position in Christ if you know him as Savior. Why? Because of God's providence. And that is why, my friend, finding your identity, not in your behavior, but in Jesus Christ is so important. That's why finding your active place in God's church, Christ's wife, his bride, is so spiritually and mentally and even emotionally important to your well-being. God's plan is guaranteed. Which leads us then to the fourth scene. This one is no less gripping than the previous one, but there's also an intense bitterness to it. I imagine as the blessing is happening, or even before the blessing, you can imagine Jacob just sitting nervously in this room while his dad is eating this meal, just thinking, can he get done with this? And let's get the blessing, and I just need to get out of here. And no sooner does he leave than Esau appears. In God's providence, Esau would not arrive until after Jacob had left the stage. And it would only take a few moments for both Isaac and Esau to recognize what Isaac already knew and what Esau was about to learn. And that's this: God's plan is irreversible. You cannot hinder it. You cannot stop it. We continue our reading again in verse number 30. As soon as Isaac had finished blessing Jacob, when Jacob had scarcely gone out from the presence of Isaac his father, Esau his brother came in from his hunting. He also prepared delicious food and brought it to his father. And he said to his father, "Let my father arise and eat of his son's game, that you may bless me." And his father said to him, "Who are you?" He answered, I'm your firstborn, Esau." And then Esau, the text says, trembled very violently. And he said, Who was that then that hunted game and brought it to me? And I ate it before you came, and I have blessed him. Yes, and he shall be blessed. And as soon as Esau heard the words of his fathers, he cries out with an exceedingly great and bitter cry. And he said to his father, "Bless me, even me also, O my father." But he said, "Your brother came deceitfully, and he has taken away your blessing." Esau says, "Is he not rightfully named Jacob? For he has cheated me these 2 times. He took away my birthright, and behold, now he has taken away my blessing." And then he said, "Have you not reserved a blessing for me?" Isaac answered and said to Esau, "Behold, I have made him lord over you, and all his brothers I have given to you or to him for servants, and with grain and wine I have sustained him. What then can I do for you, my son?" Esau said to his father, "Have you but one blessing, my father? Bless me, even me also, O my father." And Esau lifted up his voice and wept. Then Isaac his father answered and said to him, "Behold, away from the fatness of the earth shall your dwelling be, and away from the dew of heaven on high. By your sword you shall live, and you shall serve your brother, but when you grow restless, you shall break his yoke from your neck." What an excruciating moment. Yes, we recognize they both kind of had what they had coming. They got what they had coming. But it's not like we've been sitting here cheering on the deceitful Rebekah and Jacob either. That pain must have been astounding for the parent and the child. You can hear the panic in Isaac's question, "Who are you?" as it begins to dawn on him what has happened. Isaac begins to shake as he's forced to reveal to Isaac that the plan has backfired and he has blessed Jacob instead. And now Esau's response in the Hebrew there is literally screams and groans of agony. Something that was absent when he callously sold his birthright a couple chapters ago. He recognizes the providential pun-type connection of Jacob's name, which sounds very close to the Hebrew word for deceiver. And of course, in his anger, he also accuses Jacob of stealing his birthright, which that's not how that went down back in 25. Esau was just as complicit in that. Certainly, Jacob was opportunistic, but Esau had a... That's what we tend to do in these moments. We tend to skew how everything looks and look back on things differently than they actually happened. And so crushed, Esau pleads desperately for a blessing from Isaac, even one blessing. But they both shake their heads, recognizing that their own conniving has come back on their own heads. It was Isaac who had tried to give that full blessing to Esau while excluding Jacob completely. And what is the result? Esau is left with nothing. And so Isaac, recognizing his defeat in the face of God's providence, is forced to tell all of this that has happened, that he has given this blessing. He words out the blessing. And then he gives what basically some of the authors I was reading, they referred to this as an anti-blessing. This is not what Esau wanted to hear. He is told that his existence, opposite of his brother, is going to be in a less fruitful territory. He would be confined to a wandering existence that, if you remember back in Genesis, mirrors very much that of Ishmael and even all the way back to Cain. The silver lining at the end of Isaac's words is that eventually he would break off the yoke of his brother. The offspring of Esau, Edom, the Edomites, would indeed at one point break completely out from under the yoke of Israel and Judah. But between those moments, there would be great antagonism between them. Edom would on several occasions make attempts to derail God's plans for Jacob's offspring. They would fail, but they would eventually break off that yoke. Which leads us to verse 41. Now Esau hated Jacob because of the blessing with which his father had blessed him, and Esau said to himself, "The days of mourning for my father are approaching, and then I will kill my brother Jacob." But the words of Esau, her older son, were told to Rebekah. We're not certain who all Esau may have eventually shared that with. It eventually gets back to Rebekah, and so she sent and she called her younger son and said to him, "Behold, your brother Esau comforts himself about you by planning to kill you. Now therefore, my son, obey my voice. Arise, flee to Laban, my brother in Haran, and stay with him a while until your brother's fury turns away, until your brother's anger turns away from you and he forgets what you have done to him. And then I will send and bring you from there. For why should I be bereft of you both in one day?" Then Rebekah turns her attention to Isaac. Finally, they have a conversation. "I loathe my life because of the Hittite women. If Jacob marries one of the Hittite women like these, one of the women of the land, what good will my life be to me?" As our narrative concludes this morning, the brokenness of Esau continues to play out. It was a sorrow, but it was not a sorrow that leads to repentance. Rather, it was a misplaced brokenness because of his own choices. And it sprouted into deep-seated bitterness, resulting in Esau calculating how he can rid himself of his brother Jacob for good. And just as Esau's descendants would later do, he was determined to stop this line of promise. Maybe he didn't think of it exactly in all of those terms the way that we do in hindsight, but he was determined to get things his way. But again, he will be thwarted. He determines that he's going to kill his brother, but he has two problems. One is he has wisely decided to wait until the passing of his father, not realizing his father is not going to pass still for multiple decades. But second, Rebekah once again enters the picture. Being made privy to his plans, she schemes to get Jacob out of there. She thinks this is going to be a temporary arrangement. And then it seems as if she's trying to get Isaac on board with this plan and trying to get him to insert himself like a dad and encourage Jacob, "You do need to get out of here, and here's what you need to do." And of course, Isaac, as we'll see next week in the early verses of chapter 28, will do that very thing. You see, Esau cannot reverse God's plan any more than Isaac could. That final solution escapes him. And my friend, this morning, if you prioritize your plans over God, you can be sure that a moment will come, maybe sooner, maybe later, when you will come face to face with the futility of your endeavors. You cannot reverse his plans. Disappointment may cause you to try. Injustice might cause you to attempt to even the score in some way. But none of these options ever set your mind at ease. And they never set your mind on your position in the redemptive story that God is doing here. So instead of trying to reverse or re-engineer God's plans, my friend, the call this morning is this: relinquish your own claim on his plans. Now, as we leave this chapter, it's interesting what's happened through all this. The birthright is where it's supposed to be. The blessing is with the appropriate person. But think about the carnage along the way. In the end, nobody is happy, not even the ones who got their way, so to speak. Isaac, his family is a disaster. and he stands thoroughly rebuked for seeking to play the part of God. Esau loses everything that is most important to him. Though he has only sought to concern himself with important things whenever it suited him. Again, he dismissed the birthright. He wants to take this seriously now that he's older. It's too late. Even Jacob, who gets what he ultimately wants, the blessing, will now have to be exiled away from his home for decades. What a way for the Bible to communicate the passing down of the promise from Isaac to Jacob. It's not the same as it went from Abraham to Isaac. And while Rebekah got what she wanted out of her plan, this is, as best as we can tell from the verses that come after, this is likely the last time she will ever see her favorite son, Jacob. By the time he returns, it seems that she has passed away as well. What an absolute mess we people make of things when we confuse our plans with God's plans. And so let us be reminded this morning, God has a master plan in the works, and that plan will surely happen. But we each miss out on so much of the blessing of that plan when we seek to force our plan instead. Sure, it might seem like the stakes for your choices are not nearly as high since the line of Christ is not in play, right? Wait, or is it? The line of Christ actually did not stop at Christ, did it? You see, there was a single line. You've seen it in our graphic when we've had it up. There's a single line that works to Jesus. But what happens after Jesus? Where does the line of Christ go? It explodes out into multiple offshoots. Every person, no matter the ethnicity, tribe, people, tongue, nation, who trust in faith in Jesus Christ becomes a part of that. You, my friend, if you are here without Christ this morning, I appeal to you, come to faith in Christ. Put all of your confidence in his finished work on the cross. That's how you actually get in the line of Christ. For the rest of us who are already authentically bearing the name of Christian, I think you know what it means for us. You have been graciously added into the multiplication of the line of Christ. And so, yes, your planning, just like the planning of the characters in this narrative, is extremely important. You're an intimate part of God's kingdom plan, the line of Christ. What a glory! But may we also be reminded from this text that our lives are not our own. And the way we experience that glory most fully in this life is in relinquishing our claims to God's plan. Before I pray, I'm actually going to ask the musicians if they would go ahead and come up here. I'm going to lead us in a prayer in a moment. And for those who are able, I'm going to ask you to, don't do it now, but I'm going to ask you to stand with me in just a moment as I lead us in a prayer. Throughout Christian history, there have been various traditions and things that people have done to try to call to mind certain things. And I would like to share one of those with you. Some of you may be familiar, some may not. And this isn't a forced thing. We're going to have our eyes closed, not trying to manipulate anybody here. But one of the ways that Christians throughout church history, at least in some areas, have demonstrated that their life is not their own is with open hands, palms up, visually relinquishing our claim on God's plans, and then hands ready to receive the blessing of God. If you are here and you're a Christ child today, you're in that line. That blessing made back all the way in Genesis 12, even going all the way back to Genesis 3, is all about you. It's not all about you as in you're the main topic, but it's for you. And so in a moment, if you're able to, I'm going to ask you to stand with me. We're going to bow in prayer. I'm going to lead us in a closing prayer before we sing our response. But really, this is part of our response. And if you'd be comfortable doing so, I would encourage you to open your hands and remind yourself of your need to relinquish your claims on God's plans. Would you join me in standing, please?